guys, we're going to try something a little bit new. We've never really done like an interview format. So I just have some questions here that I was going to put to Keith, and just off the cuff, he hasn't seen my list, just to see where this takes us and what comes out of it. So, the world is pretty topsy-turvy. And you can't hardly look at any sector of society right now and not see the tumult and not see the, polarized positions, from religion to politics to finances to world governments to strange things happening geologically and all of that. And so for a lot of people looking at this that are believers, they know believe we're in the end times. So in terms of, and I don't mean to just put you on the spot, but in terms of like timeline, if someone came to you and said, timeline, where do you think we are? Like, do you think that we can sustain this indefinitely? How quickly do you think things will have a relief? Like, do you think we're just going to hell in a handbasket quickly? What is your overall thought process? Do you think we'll pull out of it? Do you think it'll just continue to go from bad to worse? Like, how would you answer that?
I assume you're talking about us as a nation, the United States mainly, or you talk the whole world, all of it?
The nation specifically, I mean, because we're over here, but then as a backdrop, as a part of a global community and a part of a global reality of how topsy-turvy everything is right now, because it's not just America that's up in upheaval. And a lot of times, if people don't realize that, like if they're not watching certain news cycles, they don't realize that there are riots in China. They don't realize that there were riots in Paris a couple of months ago for energy crisis, that Germany is facing like a massive, horrifying winter because of Russia's war with Ukraine. And when you think about the scriptures and wars and rumors of wars and earthquakes in diverse places, people have been saying ever since my lifetime, ever since I was a young person, we're in the end times and the rapture's about to happen. So, I mean, if someone were to ask you, my gosh, Keith, how long do you think we can stand this? Like, what do you think's about to happen and I know I'm about to ask you a little bit of a loaded question in terms of tribulation, the rapture, things like that. What would you say?
Well, before I get to maybe some of those, I would just say that I try to look at history. The book of Ecclesiastes says that which has been will be again, and there's nothing new under the sun. And so, obviously, I mean, that I've always been into art and drawing and painting and all that. And so, essentially, what I'm doing, a lot of what I'm doing when I'm drawing or painting, is that I am trying to see patterns and understand patterns and represent those patterns that I'm seeing. And so when you look at the way things work in nature and you understand that there's a connection, as I talk about so often, between the micro and the macro, that which is above and that which is below, whether we're looking at signs in the heavens of the various, the tetrad of eclipses that occurred a few years ago on Passover and Sukkot, 2 years in a row. I believe it was 2014, 2015. A lot of these strange anomalous events that have been occurring in the heavens that is telling us things there, because Genesis chapter 1 verse 14 says that the things up there are for signs, primarily signs and seasons, days and years. But the first thing it says about them is that they're for signs. And so I think when we look at the signs that we're given, and the New Testament tells us that there will be signs in the heavens and in the earth beneath. And so we're given these signs, and I think a lot of usually humanity doesn't heed the warning signs. When we're just look at things very simplistically, for example, just you start your day, you go outside and you maybe like for us, we could walk off our front porch and, what time it is, see the sun rising, or what we call the sunrise. For us, from our subjective vantage point experience, we're seeing the sunrise. And when we just analyze that very simplistically, the sun rises for us in the east and it sets in the west. Most every community that I can think of, with a few exceptions, a township will develop, and then that town will grow. And typically what happens almost always is that the town grows toward the west. Like, for example, in this community, this little town in Oklahoma that we live, the more premium real estate, as a general rule, is west of town. And the eastern part of town is the older houses, an older part of town. It's the new businesses and new developments that are happening in the west. Same with empires. We are the West.
Okay, so if you were actually being interviewed,
Mm-hmm.
like, there's going to be like only a set time to get to some of these questions. So I know you're trying to lay groundwork,
Mm-hmm.
but if the average person just comes up to you and says, "How long do you think we have, and what do you think it's going to look like?" I mean, you're probably not going to give them as well-rounded an answer. Like, for people that are really, and I'm not trying to just cut you off, but like for people that are really wanting your thought process on how much time we have, let's just put it this way, until society were to radically change if we don't course correct. Like, what do you think? What do you feel like?
It already has. I'm hesitant to be pinned down on any kind of
No, it's just
time
what you
frames
think.
and that sort of thing. I know, but I tend to shy away from being definitive on
Sure.
specific time frames and that sort of thing. But like I was saying, when you look at patterns of things in nature, and you look at patterns of history of nations, of their rise and of their fall, and what causes that, and you look at going back a couple hundred years ago, little over, with the revolution of this country. At the same time, and shortly thereafterwards, you had the French Revolution and all these other revolutions and the Communist Revolution.
Okay, so given that,
these things happen in
phases,
bunches
together.
too.
Yeah. Okay.
And we're going through
Birth
we're going through those right now. Yeah, birth pangs. The scripture calls a lot of these things, like in Matthew 24, it says that when you see all of these things, it says it's the beginning of birth pangs. And so those things have been happening for a long time, for about 2,000 years. I think that we're actually, I think we're toward the climax of all of this. And when we start looking at a lot of the narratives in the Bible and such, of how, like I said, that which has been will be again, it all is sort of repeating. A lot of the same stories are repeating in our time frame. And I don't think that when you look at all of, as you mentioned, when you look at the moral decline, when you look at the financial instability, the military instability, the instability of the family, of education, of all of the health crises that we have going on, it's unsustainable.
It's unsustainable.
And so, could it be averted? Yes. I think that probably it could, but I don't think that's very likely.
Well, and Yeshua even said something, and because I don't have it in front of me, I'm probably going to butcher it a little bit. Something about going through this scenario and then saying, "But these things have to be."
They have to be.
And that is kind of a hard. That's kind of a hard thing to say, because we, in our subjective experience down here, we have this idea that, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, I'll hear from heaven and forgive their sins and heal their land. So that's a possibility always. But then when Yeshua says things like, these things have to be, why do you think that these things have to be? Like, and I know that's kind of a curveball, because can you see from God's perspective? No, but it's like, why why do these things have to be? Is it because that we have sinned so much as a nation and as a society up until this point that it was like Manasseh in Jerusalem before Jerusalem fell to Babylon, that there was a point where God just came into Jeremiah and said, don't pray to me for this people. He is going to be judged, and Judah is going to be judged for this. Do you think when Yeshua says these things have to be, do you think it's because of sin that has compounded and this is the judgment for sin? Or do you think something else is going on, like all of the forces, like with Satan and Lucifer and all of that, certain things just have to play out a certain way? Our sin might be dovetailed into that as a nation, but do you think it's more due to our sin or more because of things, principalities and powers, of things that have to play out that way?
Probably all of it, because I find that God, as we talk about, is the epitome of efficiency, and that he has all these plates spinning at the same time. And we've talked about before, like in Genesis 15, when God is speaking to Abraham and he's telling him that his descendants are going to end up being oppressed 400 years, and then ultimately they're going to spoil, they're going to come out with all this loot from this nation that oppressed them. He said, but then there's this kind of caveat added, and he says, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. And so the Amorites is understood they're one of those major 7 inhabitants of the land of Canaan that they were going to go possess, but it's understood to be basically used to talk about all those inhabitants of the land. And so when you analyze what's being said there, is that the moment of Israel's redemption, when it's time for their redemption, is simultaneously the moment of the judgment of these lands for their abominable practices. And so God, we've been, Christianity and probably many other religions have perverted the truth in a lot of ways, and in the name of grace have given people a picture of this detached and of a God who doesn't really, doesn't judge anyone, that doesn't hate anyone, that never gets mad, and that's not the way it is. We can't project or carve out a God in the image we would like to make him like. He is what he is, and so he's going to judge things, and there's time frames that he allows processes to work themselves out before he. Sometimes if you have a righteous person or righteous people, that could be stayed for a time, like we have some of these examples in the Bible, because of the righteous acts or somebody humbling themselves. Mm-hmm. The judgment might be postponed temporarily, and by temporarily I mean maybe sometimes a generation or two.
Do you think that's happened?
It might be. It could be that some of what we've already deserved, and some of this may have been postponed because of the righteousness of the founding fathers and leaders that have people doing the right things. It's possible.
Do you think the overturning of Roe v. Wade could act as that in this, or do you think we're too far over the cliff for that to help?
I think any little bit would help. I also think that like Roe v. I think that's a huge thing.
It is.
That happened, that a lot of people want to see happen, and that without Donald Trump being elected president, we would have never gotten the Supreme Court justices to make that happen. Also, I think that up until relatively recently, this nation being the best friend to Israel, the nation of Israel, also has been counted, has merited us favor and caused us to be a blessed nation, and has probably also delayed certain judgments that might have happened otherwise.
So I want to come back to that, or pursue that in just a minute. Why, and this is maybe a loaded question, I mean, not loaded that I'm trying to trap you or anything, but just loaded in this, it's a lot to the answer. Mm-hmm. I understand that the overturning of Roe v. Wade is very upsetting to people, to women in particular. I've seen it, and I've heard it, and I understand to whatever degree I understand the position. And that makes sense to me for people who aren't believers and who don't consider the word an authority or the authority. What do you have to say about people who call themselves believers, who are believers, that believe in the authority of the scriptures, who still support the right to have an abortion?
I know some of those people, and I care about those people. Some of those people I would even see as friends or family, people that I like and care about. If those folks were broke down, needed help, sure, I try to help them and all that. But they are they're deceived, and it for whatever it is inside of them, and I don't know. I mean, simply stated, they have idols, and they're worshiping on some level other gods, and placing other gods higher than the God, whether it's their gods of politics. In many cases, maybe they may give more credence and obedience to the gods of politics, as opposed to the God of Israel, and or it could be in some cases political, racial. It could be social, their social group, their family, or whatever reasons that they have. But this is the same thing that has been done from the beginning. Is that it's child sacrifice. It's a wicked thing, and I'm not without sympathy. And I know a lot of people will no doubt try to paint me as being misogynistic, or being not being compassionate, or even that I don't have a valid or right to have an opinion on the subject because I'm not a woman. Which is
but is it about that?
No, I mean, it's not to me. I mean, just because, and I don't understand the gender or racial identity. Just because a white male runs for office doesn't mean that I'm going to want to vote for that person. And if somebody says something critical of that person, I don't necessarily I wouldn't take it, be personally offended because and see it as an attack on me because that person was questioned or criticized. A lot of people do. A lot of people, if a lot of women might, if we have a political leader that's maybe like Hillary Clinton, and she is criticized or scrutinized, a lot of women personally take that as an offense, a personal offense, because they are seeing the situation through the lens of womanhood or their gender. Other people, if there's a black guy who commits a crime and is shot by police
for resisting arrest,
because of getting violent, and ends up getting killed, I'm not going to just automatically, if I were a black person, side with that person because of their skin color, because I'm projecting myself into the situation and
identifying with it. Isn't that racism?
Absolutely. Because I should be looking at the truth and the justice of the case, not the gender or the race of the person. But we've kind of probably diverted from a lot from the questions there. But
it's okay. I've led you kind of there.
Ultimately, I mean, with the abortion, and with a lot of people too. I mean, I don't understand how a lot of black folks A lot of black folks are against abortion, but a lot of them have been conditioned to be for that, and I think it's packaged in a racial identity package for them, just like the Democrats in this last election tried to make this last election, and somewhat successfully, about abortion and women's rights. Every time we have an election, those are the leveraging issues that the politicians, particularly on the left, try to use of injecting gender and race into it rather than policy and the results of those policy. And many people fall for that over and over again. Taking this back to prophecy, in the book of Matthew chapter 24, that I know we've talked about quite a bit and recently did, it says that nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And if you look that up, for those who aren't aware of it, you can look that up in the Greek, and what that, it says ethnos shall rise against ethnos. In other words, ethnic group will rise against ethnic group. And so it's going to be people, there will be a lot of people that view every situation in terms of us and them. And that is not a just way, and the weightier matters of the law, like Yeshua talked about, the weightier matters of the law begin with justice. Justice, mercy, and faith are the weightier matters of the law. I kind of got lost on your question.
No, that's okay. That's okay. There's a lot of factors that go into that. There just really seems to be a link between how we identify, and I don't mean our gender.
Yeah.
What our identity is, and then the spirit of offense, that button gets pushed.
Yeah.
Where often I think groups of people are made to feel disenfranchised. It's like politics a lot of times pushes on these pressure points.
That's what it is. It's identity politics.
And causes a trigger reaction to happen among people, groups of people. I mean, everybody's got their triggers, but then collectively, it's like you see people really voting for their triggers. And I've watched on social media in lots of different places since Roe v. Wade was overturned. And like I said before, if people, particularly women, if they're not believers or they don't say that they believe in the authority of the scriptures, and they're mad about this, that makes sense to me, because at the risk of sounding arrogant, well, their mind hasn't been renewed in the Word of God because they don't see the Word of God as being an authority. But for those who have, it's like there's a disconnect here. Somehow the modern age and the modern narrative has become a louder trumpeting in their mind than the scriptures. When you go back and read, and a lot of people don't go to the Old Testament, they stay in the New Testament. When you go back to the Old Testament and you look at a lot of these gods and the practices of these gods, of these idols, Molech in particular, how God would say through the prophets, stop sacrificing your children to Molech. And there's a lot of different ways that it's said. People talk about, they didn't really kill him, they just caused him to walk through this little place in dedication to Molech, and other people are saying no, they really killed him.
Yeah, a lot of them did kill him from everything. That's another thing. We go back to that which has been, will be again.
So is that archaic? I mean, if a Christian were to say to you, well, that's a little archaic, I don't see it the same way, what would you say to that?
Of course not. Well, I would say there's nothing new under the sun, and that morality, values, and ethics are pretty well always what they are. And that's, people have always thought that way of, well, this is the 21st century, whatever. So now, we can kind of come up with our own truth and do our own thing now. Well, people have been doing that for a long time, and they always think that they know better than the people that came before. It's interesting, from a biblical paradigm, when you look at some of the big narratives that occur in the scripture, like Egypt, like the redemption that occurred there, the backdrop of that was abortion, that of the edicts by the Pharaoh to murder and in this case they were targeting the males. Same thing happened in the days of Herod. not long after Yeshua's birth. There was systematic genocide to try to kill the holy seed. And I believe it's the same thing in this age, maybe in the final act for the adversary, the dragon, is wroth and went to make war with the woman and the remnant of her seed, those that keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Yeshua. And, when you look at a lot of what Yeshua said, talking about the little ones, suffer the little children to come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. And that he talks about that someone who would offend one of these little ones in their belief in the faith, that it would be better for a millstone to be tied around their neck and them cast into the sea. How much more murdering and sacrificing these little ones unto these other gods. And I know that the person, it wouldn't be, it's for the same reasons. They sacrifice the children often for prosperity, for
to appease the gods and get the blessing of the gods,
and so that it would be of economic benefit in some way. That's a lot of the primary reason. Who was it recently talking about? Who was it talking about? Just brazenly and just blindly talking about how it was the lady that had run for governor, that run for Senate, and got beat again in North Carolina, I believe. And I'm for some reason her name has slipped my mind. But she was extolling the virtues of abortion and how the economic benefits, and how women, and I guess minority women in particular, how they would be detrimentally affected by any kind of limitation on abortion. And which is why the people sacrificed the babies, was for the prosperity of their tribes, their clans, their peoples, and for the crops to do well, for their economy. And basically that's what's happened. So anyone, someone who claims or thinks that they are a believer or whatever, I can't ultimately not up for me to decide the condition of their heart, but I can say that you know a tree by its fruits, and that it is so antithetical to the Spirit of God and the Word of God and the teachings of the Bible. They've been deceived, and I hope that some of these people will wake up before it's too late for them, because the nature of deception, or truth or lies, deception, is that you're always moving closer to one and further from the other one. I mean, we're not static, and so that we're always going to be moving closer to the truth at any given moment, or further away from it. And so if you turn your back on the truth for whatever your reasons, and a lot of these people, I don't think even consciously fully realize their reasons. They're just because, as you said, just like a lot of, whether you're talking about politics or religion, most of it is designed, whether through some strategic machinations, or whether it is just through being a copycat or whatever, or it's designed to bypass the intellect often and connect on a more primal and more emotional level. And so you try to get the crowd whipped up in order before taking an offering or do something to get it. And same thing, whether it's in church or election time, it's to get the masses whipped up into a frenzy and focused on the things that you want them to focus on, very much like a magician.
Well, and it's almost like, to me, women particularly, think of this as an unalienable right, like liberty in the pursuit of happiness or something. Like they think it's well, no, I'm serious.
Yeah, life.
Well,
is the
but they're focused on their life and how it's going to impact their life and what and they talk about choices and have choices, and it's like, well, you don't realize you've already made one. You've already made a choice, and there's a consequence to that choice. And I'm like you, I'm not without heart, but it's almost like when you start talking about this to a lot of women, they absolutely, because irate is not even a strong enough word. And it's like you are attacking their very ability to draw breath and live in the world. And it's almost like the desire to have choice to abort babies is in response to the patriarchy. And then so that kind of brings me to one of my other questions. This whole toxic masculinity and the problem of the patriarchy. I mean, of course there's corruption in anything, but in terms of God's word specifically and patriarchy and toxic masculinity, what would you say, are some words you would have for that, or thoughts you would have for that?
Gosh, that's a whole lot, and it kind of, to try to get to here, but
just an idea, like for example, we've got to have the right to have an abortion because patriarchy is ruling over us, and it's like, well, a lot of them will talk about incest or being raped. So it's like the whole thing kind of goes there. When that's a very, 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 very small percentage of abortions.
It is. Rush Limbaugh, the late, great Rush Limbaugh, often would say that abortion is the number one sacrament of liberalism. And I would say also of feminism, which is part of that conglomerate. And it is. I mean, a lot of people, and it was sarcastic, but also it's truthful, especially viewed through a biblical lens. You see the truth of this, that it actually is a perverse sacrament. Regarding, what about in the cases of rape or incest? Should those should that be allowed? Should we have at least not restrict those things? Well, what you in an honest argument, you would have to say, okay, before I answer that, will you give me that? If we can say we will eliminate all other abortions except for those cases that you brought up, if I give you that, well, then you give me all of these cases where it's not, and they won't. So it's not an honest issue. It is just an emotional issue that's brought up to try to
manipulate.
Manipulate and shift the focus. It's a sleight of hand thing to focus upon, as you said, a tiny minority of these cases to justify all of these others. And the toxic masculinity and all of that type of stuff. Most people, I talk quite a bit about the idea of accents and how that every one of us have an accent. And I've asked groups, like when I go to the prison, sometimes I'll say, does anyone in here have an accent? And usually they look a little confused, and most of them think that they don't have an accent. And sometimes they might say, well, Miguel has an accent, or this other guy who's from Russia, the East Coast or whatever, he does, but the rest of us don't. And I show them that we all have an accent. And so, those people that are not from the South or Oklahoma and Texas immediately pick up on my Southern accent. And like if I've given the example, like if you've got a young child and they're from rural Oklahoma, let's say, and their parents move out to Boston, Massachusetts, and they live out there for a while, and then they come back in to visit after a year or two, his friends from Oklahoma are going to find that he talks funny now. And he's going to notice that they talk different. And he didn't set out to change his accent, but it just happens. You just automatically tend to entrain to the vocal patterns and customs and patterns of what you're around. And so the same is true with thinking. The way we speak affects how we think. And so the same is true with thinking of what you're around and what you've become accustomed to seems normal, and that which is different from that is the thing that seems abnormal or foreign or like an accent. And so people will just start parroting these different whatever the word du jour is, and start a lot of people haven't even thought through these things, but it stands to reason logically, if there is a masculine or toxic masculinity, then the immediate question would be, then maybe there's such a thing as toxic femininity. Hard to say.
There is. Well, because toxicity implies a type of corruption where something that is foreign or shouldn't be there, or some condition, that it's wrong or off somehow. And that's what I resent about it. I'm certainly not going to say that I haven't met some men that were toxic, but I've met just as many women that were toxic, and nobody wants to talk about this. It's like, because that's taboo, or you're
right.
I almost said a word, get kicked off my own program here. You're just absolute, I don't even know what to say about it. Like, you're horrifyingly a bad person. You're a horrible bad person if you if you turn the narrative and say, well, if we're going to talk, like you said, if we're going to talk about this, let's talk about the toxicity the other way. And then how do we define what's toxic?
But see, that's not allowed.
Well, but it should be in as far as Christians and believers, when we're all operating off of the same standard. Toxic is toxic, no matter your race, no matter your gender.
Exactly. Well, and unfortunately, that's where we're at as a people, as a country now, and where rather than just saying you have a person, an individual that has bad behavior, bad manners or whatever, it is linked onto the gender or race in some cases. It's not in most cases. Basically, it's only if the gender is male and the race is white is the only way this is acceptable in our nature.
To safe to talk
right.
about.
Because we could talk about Coca-Cola telling their employees to be less white, or other companies essentially talking about a similar thing, or talking about how it can be a joke. A comedian, people I know, I've seen people on Facebook and stuff, people I know make jokes about so-and-so or even themselves being so white,
really?
In using it in a derogatory way of like, oh gosh, so-and-so, he's so white, he has no rhythm, he's not good at sports or whatever, or whatever. But you take any other race and you take out the word white and you put any other thing in that blank and see what happens. And it immediately, that person would absolutely be wow. If you talked about female toxicity, or Black or Hispanic toxicity, or anything like that, wow. I mean, talk about creating an absolute firestorm.
Well, and Jordan Peterson has gotten involved, or has gotten like just for just pulling him out of the air.
Yeah.
He's talked a lot about this, and talked about women and men, not just men, women and men.
Yes.
He's been a psychologist, and so he's dealt with a lot of this and has a lot of background, educated background on psychological traits and what they are.
And why is it controversial?
Well, I agree.
For me to point out the glaring obvious that certain racism is okay, and even we talk about systematic racism or systematic discrimination or whatever, those types of examples that I was given have become systematic, to where it is acceptable for about anyone. Nothing would happen to me or anyone else of any race or gender for them to make a comment. And like if I said we need to get a lot of these old white men out of Congress.
Mm-hmm. It has been said.
Oh yeah, things like that have been said over and over.
Yeah, nobody bats an eye.
Rather than their age and their race and their gender makes them bad, and so we should, rather than what they believe,
and
what's in their heart,
how they voted,
rather than in accordance with the Reverend Martin Luther King, that his dream was where we got to a point where we got past all of that crap, and we looked at the content of people's character, not their age, their gender, or their race, to determine if they should be kept in office or not.
Well, it seems like that racism is talked about, but it's not talked about both ways. It's like a one-way street. It goes one way, and you talk about racism this way, but if you try to go back up the road, that is absolutely taboo, and you're a complete racist for even saying it.
Critical race theory that's being peddled to, or attempted to, and probably still is in certain places, to kids. That's where there is a systematic effort to get in and to create little racists from an early age, and create little perverts and corrupt these little ones by bringing in these transvestites to read to them, and to take these kids to these drag queen shows and all this. It's all to corrupt and destroy, whether through abortion or whether through immorality, to destroy the little ones, the innocent and the good and the beauty of this world. And there's only one force that really wants to do all of these things.
No matter what the face is, no matter what the narrative
is. And who gives a damn if he's a Democrat or Republican? If it's Satan, it's Satan.
I agree.
And I don't understand how, but it says in Revelation 12 that the dragon has deceived the whole world.
Yes.
And it doesn't say that he just deceived one race or one gender or one political party or something, or one denomination or one religion.
Right.
It says that he deceives the whole world. I'm reminded in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, it talks about that, and I believe it's painting a picture of these last days, that it says that because they rejected truth, and they did not have, and they had pleasure in unrighteousness, and all that means is they had pleasure in doing the wrong things.
Right.
They had pleasure in carrying signs around and voting for wrong things. They took pride in that. You have people, celebrities and other people, bragging publicly and screaming in megaphones and wearing shirts, bragging about how many abortions that they've had. Recently, there's been so many things, even in this past week or two, that pedophilia is becoming rampant. Systematic.
Yes, I agree.
Systematic pedophilia.
Yes.
That through various fashion and ad companies, just doing horrible things of little kids, putting this stuff together. That is not, you've moved way past artistic expression and creativity. I mean, this is evil
Corruption.
things.
Yes.
Last night we heard the news of the little girl in Wise County, Paradise, Texas, who was abducted by this contract. What was the company?
A contract worker for FedEx.
FedEx, and who abducted this little girl, and who knows what he did to her, and murdered her, I guess within about an hour of abducting her. And this is, the society is sick, the society is evil, and a lot of people, you might be saying, a lot of people might say, well, I didn't do it, I'm not for that. And so, and people have said this about slavery, and I may have too, and there is a truth to it. On one hand, none of us were alive, none of us were involved in that. Most people were not involved in what that wicked FedEx worker did. But this is from a biblical worldview, and this is something that's alien to most people here. The collective can be and is held responsible for the wickedness of individuals, especially if you knowingly acquit and let these people go. You can look at, in the book of Genesis, we have a situation where Isaac and Rebekah, we have this mistaken or stolen identity thing, really, where they take on false identities. They tell everyone that Rebekah is Isaac's sister, and same thing happened with Abraham and Sarah, with Pharaoh and Abimelech. Same thing happened with Isaac and Rebekah. And he told her, okay, we'll wind it up here. There was this guy Abimelech. They took in Rebekah, and he found out. He saw Isaac out sporting with Rebekah one day, sporting, and he said, he brought him in. He said, "This isn't your sister. This is your wife. Why did you do this? You could have brought horrible guilt upon me and my people. What did we do to you that you have done this evil to us?" He said, "One of the people could have laid with her and brought guilt upon our whole nation." This kind of thing, you might be aware in the book of Joshua. There was a guy named Achan, after they the spoils that they brought back from Joshua, or from Jericho, they weren't supposed to. And this guy, against what God said, brought back this silver and these garments, and he buried this treasure under his tent. And he was, because of that, the nation
lost a battle.
Yeah, lost, I think, maybe a couple, at least one.
Right.
But a curse came upon the nation because of that.
Of one man.
Because of that one guy's sin.
And can I jump in real quick, just to make a note of something? I don't know that this would have happened to this degree that quickly had they not been a covenanted people. And so it kind of comes back around to, for people who are believers, for people who believe that the scriptures are an authority, more is expected and more is required of those people.
But Abimelech and Pharaoh and these people were not believers. They were pagans, yet they had more honor in their paganism and in their understanding of right and wrong.
Well, paganism is just a problem because you have the wrong God. But we talked about this earlier, that even the pagans had a respect for the system that had a God. Yeah, well, they did, and whether they had the right God or not, they still had a system of there is some God or a pantheon of gods in charge. There are rules, and we will be penalized if we cross them. At least the pagans had that belief system. Now we have degenerated into some kind of a humanism where there's no divine order and there's no punishment for things wrong. No one wants to talk about punishment. And I know we need to probably wrap this up, but no one wants to talk about punishment for infraction of divine law. And I think that's one of the biggest problems we have in our society right now.
I want to give one more example in the book of Deuteronomy that there's this scenario and ritual that's brought up. It says that if a homicide takes place, basically, they find a dead body, that it says that the elders, the leaders of that community, are to go out and they're to measure and they're to figure out what city the body was found closest to, and whichever city that the corpse is found closest to, the leaders go out and they are to take a heifer, and they are to take that heifer, I think that's never to have had a yoke on it, to this rough place. And they chop off its head, and they wash their hands over that heifer, and they basically give an oath and say, "We don't know anything about this murder, how it happened. We didn't have anything to do with it."
This is one person's murder. One person.
And they don't even know who did it, but they have to go through this, else a curse is over that community. Imagine this country with all of those kinds of things that happen all the time that we probably don't even hear about, and that the systematic murder of all of the innocents since Roe v. Wade, even before, but especially since then. And by the way, if anyone wants to bother to do any research into the history, into Margaret Sanger, who is the founder of Planned Parenthood, she was a eugenist, and she wanted to sterilize and basically eliminate black people. Most of those Planned Parenthoods were put in poor black communities, and to this day, that's where, from what I understand, the majority of those are. That is her legacy to this very day. People ought to go back and look, and to imagine that this racist, wicked Margaret Sanger had this vision to exterminate and sterilize black people and others too, that somehow this thing could be whitewashed to the point to where women and blacks and other minorities could be sold into this wicked ideology. I have no idea. I mean, it's deception. Just like I was 2 Thessalonians 2, because you rejected truth and didn't have pleasure in, you had pleasure in unrighteousness, it says that God will send you strong delusion so that you will believe a lie, so that, it says he will send them strong delusion so they will believe a lie, so they might all be damned or condemned in who rejected the truth. It's a poor paraphrase of that passage.
Well, I hate to cut you short, but I appreciate
I understand.
you answering questions and
Sure.
telling me your perspective and
Sorry, I didn't get to the prophecy stuff
that's
so
okay.
much.
We could do it another time. We're kind of
Okay.
we're experimenting with for our viewers, just to kind of get into your head a little bit more.
Okay.
From a current event. I mean,
Okay.
yes, from a biblical basis, but also from current events and speaking directly to things that are affecting our lives now. And I think that that's good.
Okay.
So I appreciate you sitting here with me and answering these questions.
Thank you.
So.
Hope everyone enjoyed it, and hope somebody got something out of it.
Okay. Maybe we'll do it again sometime.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye. What one must do? What is it one must do? Do that again for our audience, what you were doing mere seconds before I hit the record button. Oh, yeah, right. Everyone knows that you are fibbing.
No.
So talk normally so we can do a test. What is this?
Now I got to do it.
Most of our people that watch won't even know
Probably.
what you're talking about.
Probably not.
That it was Dana Carvey doing an impression of George W. Bush in 1990 something.
Somewhere on many years ago.
I mean, not that many.
In a galaxy far, far away.
Here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, far, far away from here. Okay. I guess we've...
You want to do the test and see how it sounds?
This is a test, isn't it?
It is, but I mean... Okay.
Okay.
Okay, goodbye.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Hey, if you like this video, please click like and subscribe to be notified whenever we release new content, and to help other people find us out there on the vast plains of YouTube land. If you have a question or a topic you'd like for us to do a video about, just leave it in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. Later, y'all.